Welcome to 8 Cubes. We've got new cards to talk about. Let's start with Scorn. Scorn is the card that is going to rotate into your Spotlight caches on Tuesday. It is a 1-2. When you discard this card, you give it +2 power and one of your cards on the board +2 power. So at base rate, this is similar to Scream or similar to Apocalypse, a card that gets +4 when you do something that is not a common game action. I look at this card as a very obvious discard card candidate, and I do think that it is a little bit more likely to succeed currently than it would have been had Hela not been nerfed, because discard is very much a total point output kind of deck that was overshadowed by Hela with Hellcow, but now might actually be able to succeed. As weird as it may sound, the nerf to Hellcow might actually make a card like Scorn a lot more viable.
Yeah, so with this card, I have two things that firstly come to mind. The first one is like you mentioned, this is clearly a discard deck only card. Like it gets so much buff from just being discarded once, right? It's like +2 to itself and something on the board, so it's like +4. So it's like a 1/6 of sorts, right? And obviously in a discard deck, you kind of discard this card like definitely more than one. So it can easily be like a 110 in terms of stats, 114 even. So I feel like this is like naturally going to go into your discard deck. Then which begs the second question, which is I feel like we haven't really explored discard decks for like months. And like the last time we really explored discard decks, right? I feel like the deck list is very like fixed, like that you need to play like one every single card that needs to be there needs to be there. Like the Apocalypse needs to be there, the Modok needs to be there, the Mobius needs to be there, Dracula needs to be there. Like everything that needs to be there needs to be there. So why are you cutting to play this card? Maybe it's the Meek, it's like I feel like Meek might be the one, because firstly it's just Meek is sitting on the board, it's gonna die to Killmonger for sure. So like that might be the weakest link in the discard deck, and this could fill the role because you can play this like on turn 6, and then like it's gonna be buffed up, and then it could dodge a Killmonger potentially. So I feel like this card could potentially replace like the Meek spot. But like at the end of the day, I feel like this card has been underexplored for a very long time already. So when this card comes out, I feel like all the discard bros, the aficionados, the fanboys, fangirls, they'll bring the discard deck back, and hopefully something will come out of it.
Here's my worry, I think, specifically for Scorn and Discard, is that there are, the major thing that Discard doesn't want to see, and it's the major thing that any pure points, no interaction deck doesn't want to see, is a deck that does pure points better. And I worry that a lot of the Agent Venom decks are decks that do pure points better than Discard, right? Because they are A, decks that are playing things like Iron Man, but B, even just like Hitmonkey type stuff is going to be really hard for you to beat, especially because they can just do things like stay out of your Dracula lane. And that means that additional information, their very flexible turn 6 compared to your not very flexible turn 6, means that even if you are putting equal numbers of points on the board, theirs are often going to be better distributed. And I'm not sure you're putting equal numbers of points on the board with those decks. The issue is, I think, that I'm not sure Scorn is enough. I do think that it's going to be very difficult for me to believe that this is not going to be a buff to discard. I think this card looks very, very powerful, honestly. A card that scales +4 and affects the board and makes that turn 6 that is otherwise so awkward and predictable way less predictable, because now you have a big guy in hand and your Apocalypse stays in your hand to be discarded by Dracula. So you have a big guy and some swarms. That's awesome. Like, that is all exactly what the doctor ordered for discard. What I worry is that it won't be comparatively enough. There is a world where it is enough, and suddenly this vaults discard up into legitimately tier 2, tier 1 competitive status. I don't think it's a particularly likely world, but discard's major issues are that it lacks points to compete with the true points top end decks, and that it is predictable on the final turns where other points decks are very unpredictable. For example, the bounce decks are obviously unpredictable. The Gwenpool Mysterio decks are unpredictable. But even other Agent Venom decks, like, they play an Iron Man. Okay, are they playing a Cosmo and a Mystique? Are they playing a Claw and a 1-drop? They don't know what they're doing. But you, as a discard player, you got 3 drops. You got 3 power dudes and you got Apocalypse. That's your hand. And now you have a real mix up there.
Yeah, I just went a little bit into my think tank a bit because like we mentioned like about a few minutes ago about Agent Venom decks, right? That like might have just more power than this as well. Agent Venom bound
Yeah.
specifically. So I was just thinking like, all right, can we actually run Agent Venom in this card because of like Dracula, Mobius? But then I thought about the Modok that gets reduced, the Apocalypse that gets reduced. I'm just like, nah, it's like it kind of just like
Yeah.
buffs some stuff and then reduces everything else. So probably not.
It is kind of interesting just like how powerful that card is, but we'll get to
All
that.
right.
Next up, Misery in Review. And I think Misery in Review has been a card that is not particularly worth opening, but also a card that has some incredibly unique and confusing implications. I guess what I would draw the parallel to with Misery is Misery reminds me a little bit of Phoenix Force, where if you're
Mm.
someone who just likes weird interactions, who wants to do weird and awkward and confusing things that are like different from what everyone else is doing, and they're not bad, they're just not the best thing in the game. Like, you will be the person playing like a rogue deck. Misery is very much a rogue deck card to me. And that's not to say she's not worth buying. Just like, if you're looking to hyper optimize your purchases, she is not currently part of the best decks in the game. That's what I can tell you right now. But she is this like very interesting and unique card. For example, did you know that if you have a card with an on reveal down and you have a Phoenix Force down in the same lane and you misery that lane, the card with the on reveal dies comes back as the Phoenix Force, and then the Phoenix Force does not die. If you're the kind of person who just like gets a lot of value out of knowing stuff like that and like knowing that your opponents probably don't know stuff like that, that's the kind of thing that misery players I think are going to want to be. They're gonna be like a hyper Johnny type of player, to use the Magic player psychographics, a combo guy. That's what Misery wants you to be. It's not like she does nothing either. Like, Misery Electro is pretty damn strong. The Misery decks that are using it with Darkhawk, courtesy of Jet, are pretty reasonable as well. Like, I think there's strong stuff to do with this card. Electro, the Hood, things like that are actually good. It just hasn't coalesced into a fully developed strategy just yet.
Yeah, so actually, good thing you mentioned the Misery Dark Hawk thing, because I wanted to ask whether you guys see a lot of that Misery Dark Hawk thing on the NA server, because like even on the Asia server, when I'm not in the top echelons of ladder anymore, but like I still see like Misery Dark Hawk a lot on like on the Asia server. Something about just like letting your opponent have more rocks in their deck just like speaks to a lot of people, I would say. Yeah, no, but I want to talk about Misery also simply just because I feel like in the previous video we were both a little bit lost, right? We'll be like, this card may not be that good. We don't really know where to put this card. But apparently people are finding a lot of homes for this card. But I also do agree that it's not like these homes are like spectacular.
Yeah.
I do like the Misery Electro one for what it's worth. Misery Electro, She-Hulk, Infinite, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of do like that one. I feel like that one might be the simplest application, but the most effective one. Like I feel like for Misery is what I think.
I think that the Darkhawk Misery deck is actually, to me, by far the best deck that she's in.
Mm,
I haven't seen a lot that suggests any of the other stuff is like I'm not saying it's bad again, but it's like the kind of thing where it's like you have this confusing and weird deck that's like scraping a 50% win rate off and then
yeah.
trying to win big cubes when your opponents don't know what you're doing. The Electro Misery deck that has the War Machine combo in it
Mm-hmm.
is like worse than every other War Machine combo deck at being a War
Yeah.
Machine combo deck, but it beats the crap out of War Machine mirrors. Like, it's like
Yeah.
absolutely unbeatable in a War Machine mirror,
Such a
which is
weird
it's just a
conundrum.
very funny situation to find yourself in as a deck. I don't know. There's like some applications of this card, but it definitely hasn't established itself as like an Agent Venom tier. You gotta have
Mm-hmm.
this.
Yeah, I think what we are driving at, or what at least I feel like is being driven at, is that like all these misery decks feel like you're putting a lot of effort into making it work when you can just play something else that like probably
Yeah.
gets the points out without that much effort.
Yeah. And I don't know if that's always going to be the case. Maybe they buff Misery. I don't really know how they would do that. 4-8 seems like kind of an insane stat line to put on something like
Yep.
that. And I don't think you can make it a 3 cost either. I don't know. It almost feels like this card is as strong as it can possibly get, but we'll
Yeah,
see. I
agreed.
guess I doubt it. But the main thing here is that the card is strong enough to be good in an unpolished state. That's not a guarantee that it will ever be better than that, though. When we last left off on 8 cubes, we were in a 4-part metagame. Agent Venom decks, Hella decks, Clog decks, and War Machine combo decks. Two of those are now gone, and we find ourselves in a bit of a two-part metagame. And so I think it's usually worth talking about these two decks that are dominating, or the variants on them, of course, because there is, of course, variation within these camps. Agent Venom isn't a deck unto himself. There's like 4 or 5 decks there. Storm Combo is at least 3 decks. The point I'm trying to make here, though, is that you need to have a plan against both of those, so I think it's probably good to talk about what those decks do well and what those decks don't do so super well, and how you would like to approach beating them, and that's what we're going to theme a couple of these next topics on. First up, Agent Venom. We're going to talk about the mid-range list first, I think. This is the classic one, which is basically the Iron Man and Claw one, and it has maintained an absolutely astonishing win rate at top 10% Infinite. It is the most played deck at the time of recording, with 4,300 games since the patch in top 10%, a 58% win rate in top 10% over those 4,800 games, a dominant statistical performance. Like, I have rarely seen a single deck have that level of a dominant statistical performance with that amount of sample size in top 10% Infinite. It has been a very rare occurrence, and it is happening right now.
Yeah, so the Agent Venom mid-range deck that we are just talking about, I feel like this is one of the decks that I can actually talk a lot about, because that's the deck that I've been playing the most. Actually, fun fact, guys, I still play this game. That's the one deck that I've been playing a lot of, by the way. And I really agree that it has so much. It's very interesting because like it's not exactly a difficult deck to play, but I feel like
No.
you need to really think ahead, because like there's a lot of things whereby you need to pre-allocate, like because you're running a Cosmo deck that's also running its own on reviews, right? So I feel like you really need to like plan where you want your Cosmo to go, which probably often is like the Claw, the Iron Man location, because you can't play on reviews there anyway, right? So and then you need to think about like if the Cosmo is here, all right, I need to win the other location, so some of my on reviews need to go there and all that kind of thing. And like if you want to go double Cosmo, you need to plan like, oh, I can't play any other on reviews on these double Cosmo locations and stuff like that. And you have to win with Iron Man or Claw, that kind of thing. So you need to like pre-allocate your plan for the rest of the game, like easily as early as like turn 2. You kind of need to know where stuff needs to go already, you know. So I feel like this deck is actually relatively interesting. Also, the simple part about the deck is like you can just snap on playing Agent Venom on turn 2, because the entire deck just gets like Omega buffed, you know. Agent Venom on turn 2 with an Iron Man still in your deck is an insane amount of points. Like the Iron Man plus one other card quite literally often just solos a location if it's buffed by Agent Venom. So yeah, I really like this deck a lot. I wouldn't say it's the most points in the game right now. I think it's probably some form of bounce is probably the most points in the game. But this is for what it's doing. Not the most points in the game, but it's a lot of like it's a decent amount of points, and it also has like floodgates in the Cosmo like
Yeah.
built in. So it's a deck that like does a bit of everything really well, and I can understand why it's in the top 10. Like it's doing so well at the top of Infinite right now.
I think that the deck, I would describe it as easy to learn, hard to master, because
True.
it's just a deck that, like, if you pick it up and you're an idiot, you still understand what this deck is doing, right? Like, you don't have to be incredibly smart to play Agent Venom and then make a couple Iron Men,
Yep.
right? Like, you can figure that out, right? You don't have to be like a genius to understand, oh, I'm Athena deck, let me play 2 cards a turn, right? The part where the deck gets complex, and this is the part where like there's actual skill expression in it, is prioritizing what you're trying to do. Let me play for priority because my opponent has Rogue and I need to Cosmo the lane my Claw or Iron Man is in. Let me make the plays that establish my ability to do that. Let me not waste my Cosmo early because that only makes them fully aware of where it is safe to play stuff on turn 6. All that kind of stuff, the like more contextual stuff, is actually very difficult to do with the deck, but the baseline, let me just put some numbers down, is great. And I think that's why it's my number one recommendation for anyone who wants to climb right now, is just like take a deck that's like, it may not be easy to master, but you can figure out what you're supposed to do. You can be dumb and still win a ton of games with this deck. And I realize that sounds like a bad thing. It's a good thing if you're trying to climb.
Yeah, I think KM mentioned one more point which is very important that I kind of also want to highlight. It's that like he mentioned like you might want to delay your Cosmos sometimes, right?
Mhm.
So that you can like not give them a safe lane to play their cards and all that kind of thing. That also just means that you eventually want to win with your Cosmo, which means you
Mhm.
still need priority,
Yep.
right? So even if you are delaying your Cosmo for like a turn 6, you kind of still need to plan out such that you will have initiative going into the final turn. So that's just one more thing to think about with the deck. So I like the saying which you mentioned, which is simple to what did you say? Simple to pick up, difficult to master,
Yep.
right? Is that what was? Yeah, I think that's perfectly describing what this deck is.
The remaining, I guess you'd say, unfair deck in the format is Storm Combo. And again, not really a deck so much as a group of decks. There is, of course, the move mid range one with Madam Web and the move cards and an Infinite and the War Machine. I've been calling it the drink in the juice box for nearly a month at this point, and I'm not going to stop now. And we also, the opposite of that would be the move version of it, but the other move version of it being not Madam Web. Instead, we're playing a Scream mid range deck as the backup plan, which I think is probably a little bit worse, but appeals to me as a player much more heavily because I love my dinky mid range decks. What can I tell you? You give me a dinky mid range deck that plays a 6/12 on the final turn of the game, I'm going to be like, hell yeah, I love playing that. It's awesome. That deck, of course, has the typical weakness of Scream decks, which is if you don't draw Scream, they're not very good. But if you do draw Scream, it is absolutely amazing. And of course, all of these decks are fused together by the combination of Storm, War Machine, and Legion. The way deck building works for Storm, War Machine, Legion is not as simple as just jam it into every deck, but what you want to do is put it in a deck that can win the Storm lane on its own, and then you go from there, making sure Storm is a valuable card in your normal game plan and in your combo game plan, which allows you to aggressively snap your Storms, which is a very scary thing for your opponents to deal with. There is, of course, also the Electro Misery version of this deck. I consider that a kind of distant third, but it is worth bringing up because it absolutely dominates mirrors. It's just unbelievable how good that deck is in mirrors. Like, anyone who's playing Storm War Machine Legion, I feel like the biggest counter to it is that Storm War Machine Legion deck.
Yeah, the funny thing is because playing Storm is still 3 mana 2/2,
Yes,
right? Like
bad, right?
if your opponent is the one doing it for you and you're playing the
Yes.
deck that just accesses the Storm location with no effort.
Yep.
So it's like you don't have to play the 3 mana 2/2, they'll do it for you and you just win the location
Mm-hmm.
with your access anyway. Yeah, but what I want to talk about specifically the early move package with the whole Storm War Machine Legion thing. Because what the move package does is it's flexible. It's a sizable amount of points that is flexible and can access the Storm location, right? So
Yep.
I feel like that's what the early like Madam Web Arana thing move package really does with the Storm War Machine Legion. And I also want to shout out like Infinite, like it's just so satisfying whereby you know you've already won with the early move package on one location. So what do I do with the rest of my mana? I just play 20 power on turn 6 because that easily just wins the other location, you know. So I feel like this deck, it's one of those, it actually is borderline of one of those unfun decks to play against, right? You think
Yes.
about it, because you kind of have to be playing similar things because you need access to the Storm location as well, and you also kind of need to like not just straight up outright lose to Storm or Legion, you know. So I feel like it's very unfun if you want to play like other things that have no access to all these like locations, you know. So I feel like this deck being in the meta sort of like makes you have to play a certain style as well, whereby you need cards that have mobility, you need cards that like I guess play your own like you said, like the counter to the Storm, right? So like I guess it's sort of like tunnels you into playing certain decks only, and that could be seen as unfun to certain players for sure.
I think the thing is, it doesn't actually do that because it never wins more than like 2 cubes in those games.
Yeah,
Where it's
yeah. I mean,
part of my deck building thing is just like, if they full combo me off, it happens like 13% of the time. But if I queue into them and then they get the 13%er, it's like, okay, you take my 2. It's fine. Like, I'll live with
but
that.
that's the thing, KM. People don't like to retreat. I think we've established that by now. That people don't like to retreat. So people
Look,
don't like to retreat. They can't play their normal decks. But they have to retreat to this inevitable
if
combo. It
you're
equals
if you're
unfun, right?
telling me that there are people out there who are not retreating when they
They don't
can't
like it,
play
man. They're just gonna
cards.
hope. They're just gonna hope you don't have the final piece or something.
Sure. I mean, I actually do that a decent amount. Like, again, it's like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm not going to get bluffed out of this game. I refuse. juice. Like, you're not blowing me out of this game. I'm staying, and I'm giving you that extra one because I don't believe you. Statistically, I'm right not to believe you, too. I think a lot of people don't know this, but all of the art of me that's on my pages is me as Sera. And I, like, for the longest time, Sera was the thing to do in the beta. My favorite card in the game was a card that I really wanted, that Flaviano Sera ultimate variant. Like, it was my whole thing.
For
And
like a year, right?
yeah, and then as the game actually progressed, turns out she ended up being not all that good. And so whenever there is a good Sera deck, a really good Sera deck, which is rare, I really enjoy it. And right now, I think there is a good Sera deck, and it's partially related to the topic of the next video, of the next subject here. But I wanted to talk about the Sera deck that I've been playing recently, which is, of course, I'm not gonna lie, it's an Agent Venom deck. But really, when
Wow.
I talk about Sera, what I want to talk about is the relevance of specific tech cards in the meta. Because it's not like I'm playing Shang-Chi and Enchantress. We aren't in 2022. I'm playing Rogue, and I'm playing US Agent, and the rest of the deck is points. And I think that is the unique way in which Sera becomes approachable. I actually recently saw that Revis was also doing unique stuff with Sera, and what I have learned over the years is if Sera is to be good, it is not as a pure tech deck. It is almost
Yes.
always as a points deck with some tech attached. It is not, we are no longer in that world where you can be a fully reactive tech deck. There are Madam Web Cosmos running around here. There are, Elias running around here. You can't play like that anymore. And so I think that, it's probably worth acknowledging that it's actually impossible to play quote unquote Sera control now. You can't do it. You have to be something else. And that is what every Sera deck, I think even back to like when we were playing Sera and Surfer, which probably wasn't good in the first place, has been. And I think that is worth acknowledging in terms of like cards getting repurposed and adapting to new contexts.
Yeah, I think what I want to add to this, because I feel like everything you've said is just like on the money, and what I just want to add is like just want to rewind you guys back down a bit down memory lane, whereby the last time before this moment where Sera was good, it was actually also a points deck. It was Miss Marvel, it was Gladiator, it was
Yes.
like basically cards that didn't counter anything, but there were a lot of points, and then you add a few counters, So it's like points plus counters, and that actually won one of my Lambi opens like half a year ago as well. So like that was like the first time Sera had been good in a while, and it was like one of the best things to do because it had natural points and then you ran some counters. So I feel like this is probably the winning recipe for Sera, right? Like we don't go full tech because at the end of the day, like a lot of the stuff that Sera tech runs in the past was like I guess you run like Shadow Kings. Shadow Kings don't
You
actually.
still you still run Shadow King. It's
Yeah,
just like you're not running these fours anymore. You can't afford it.
yeah, of course. Yeah, the thing about Shadow King is also like it doesn't actually kill off a card, it just shrinks it back down. And when you shrink back down a card, you actually need additional points to be bigger than the card, right?
Yes.
So that's why the whole Miss Marvel thing was super successful back then because it added like 15 power to a deck that had counters. So that's actually something that's very important to point out.
I think the real secret to behind why I've been happy with Sera recently is just US Agent. And I have a whole thing about US Agent that I'm going to get into because I think that if you are trying to break the duopoly at the top of the metagame,
What's
you
duopoly? Oh,
when there's
two
two,
monopoly. The
yes,
double monopoly.
yes.
Okay, got it. Let's go,
Uh,
let's go.
I am. That totally took me out of it. I was in the middle of it, and now all I
I'm
can think
so
of is
sorry.
what's duopoly. Okay, it's the sequel to Monopoly. All right, I'm making Monopoly 2, duopoly. Okay, I'm done. I've got no more jokes left. We are gonna talk about US Agent, who I regard as the tip of the spear in beating that duopoly, in dealing with what they are trying to do. Because, it's not going to win you any games against them on your own. But what it will do is take your deck that is kind of close and put it over the top in that matchup. Because one of the things that US Agent is amazing at is dealing with an Iron Man, dealing with a Claw, and doing so without being vulnerable to Cosmo. Nearly every other card that you would play for those scenarios, Rogue, or a Shadow King to shrink the Iron Man down. Those are still cards that are good, but they can get Cosmoed. And having a card that will meaningfully impact that lane for a very cheap amount that cannot get Cosmoed is such a premium thing to have right now. Which is weird, because when you look at the metagame, there's not really all that many 5 drops in it right now. Like, there are a couple 4, 5s, and 6s that are like major parts of this, but it's like, maybe like 3 or 4 seems like about the right number in most decks, and really only
Mm.
2 in the deck we're playing it for, but they're such an incredibly important part of that deck that you end up getting so much value out of -4 because it's effectively -8 on an Iron Man lane. And that kind of stuff, if you are trying to beat those decks, US Agent has been consistently the best card to start with for me. And finding the best home for him is basically what my last week has been about. Like, if I'm trying to be a rogue deck builder, and I've got like 3 different US Agent decks, all of which I've been incredibly successful with, and they're all just on the premise of, let me just find the best home for this card. Because if I find something good, it will win that matchup.
Yeah, I think the crazy thing about US Agent, like it's not just good versus Iron Man, it's actually exceptionally good versus Iron Man because like you mentioned, right? It doesn't just shrink it by 4. It's actually like double down if you think about
Yeah.
it. Because what Iron Man does is double the points on the board, right? And like I think one thing that I don't think this is underlooked, but I think like just worth to mention is that US Agent is super cheap to play. Like it's
Yes.
such low cost. You can pair it with so many things. Like it can literally come down on the final turn after they've played the Iron Man, right? So you know exactly where the Iron Man is, and then you can pair it with something else, right? So I feel like it's one of those like 2 card combos on the final turn that completely wrecks that mid range AV deck, you know. And I've never really been a fan of US Agent, but like the more I look at the card, like I think it just perfectly fits into the meta as a counterplay right now.
Yeah, because even in decks that aren't that, like, I've hit a War Machine with it, and that's just a 2/7. And it's like, that's the
Sure, yeah,
downside. That's when it's bad. Those are the matchups
yeah.
you're not playing it for. It's a 2/7. It's just like, okay, this card's just awesome right now. I wanted to talk about this meta because I feel as though it is fairly constricted. I know that good players can do well with off meta stuff, and I think that will always be true. I think players like Butt and Yo Woody are a great testament to just like, it's easy to do well with off meta stuff right now. Players like Derek and Barzy are able to do that. It's very easy to do well with off meta stuff, which means talking about any meta game as a set thing can be a little bit fraught because there's a million content creators out there who are very good at the game who are like, actually, here's my deck and I did really well with it, right? And so actually talking about what a metagame is fairly difficult. And when I try to talk about it, I boil it down to like, what are a lot of people playing at the top end and how successful is that, right? And fundamentally, what I keep coming back to is the most successful and most played deck at the top end is Agent Venom, period. The next most successful and most played deck at the top end is a different Agent Venom deck. And so it's like, all right, we need to start having a conversation about Agent Venom because I really want to know what people think about this one because there are so many different issues wrapped up in this meta when we talk about this meta that I want to just explain why I'm a little confused and go through all the details, and people in the comments tell me which one the most important is. All right. So first things first, Agent Venom is a season pass card. Now, there's 2 ways to take this. 1, that means it's cheaper to acquire than other cards. 2, that means that if you're free to play, you cannot get that card. Is that an upside or a downside? Next on the list, Agent Venom is a very powerful card, but in a way that is still playing Marvel Snap. Is there a qualitative difference between a card like Agent Venom or, for a comparison, what Sage was, where it's just like, this is just a really good card that you can beat, and you're playing normal Marvel Snap, compared to cards like Hela or Clog cards, where the goal is to not play the game as much as you possibly can? Is there an appreciable difference in how the community receives those cards? If Agent Venom was comparably strong but more unfun, would people be more angry with it? I think the answer to that is like very obviously yes, but that's beside the point. Do you, as a player watching this, feel a difference? Like, do you feel anything different playing against Agent Venom or playing against Hela? At what point does feel matter? And at what point do stats matter? Because Agent Venom's success has been frankly unbelievable to me. The card has, to me, is the tier 1 card in the game right now. The best season pass card since I don't know when. You could say Hope Summers, you could say Elsa. Like, we're talking about that.
Yeah.
And I am not sure how to feel about it. And I really just kind of wanted to throw the floor up just to you And to everyone else in the comments, like, where are you at on these questions? Because I feel like you can go a lot of different ways.
I think I'm just gonna answer like one of those questions in like personally what I think, right? I feel like Agent Venom is one of those cards that people don't mind being good. Is what I've noticed. Like I feel
Mhm.
like when it comes to complaining about cards being too good, I don't really think Agent Venom. I
Yeah.
don't see people complaining. People never complain about Agent Venom. I feel like it's really just one of those things, right? Which is like we talk about this a lot on multiple videos in the past as well. It's like Agent Venom is a good card that lets your opponent still play the game and lets you
Yes.
still play the game. So I feel like Agent Venom does good stuff, buffs the entire deck, and there's so many ways to build Agent Venom. So there's deck diversity, it's powerful, but it doesn't stop your opponent from having fun. And I think the
Yeah.
definition of fun for a lot of people is that like I can still play my cards, you know. So it's not old Professor X levels of unfun. It's like far from that. So I feel like people don't really complain about Agent Venom. The general sentiment is that I'm happy to have this good card. I don't mind buying a season pass for this good card. But obviously I think then we go back to the point of like people that don't buy the season pass don't get to enjoy this good card. And I think that problem will never be solved in the sense that like I guess you can solve it by never printing a strong season pass card, but they've been shown to not like
Yeah.
not do that. You know, they like printing strong season pass cards. It's been shown. So like I feel like this will not change. And I guess at least the point that I can drive home is that like if you really want to like get bang for your buck, this season pass is really worth the bang for your buck.
Yeah. Like this card, like I've noticed this for a while, is that like Marvel Snap players are way better at noticing things are unfair when those things are not power. I don't really know a better
Mhm.
way to say that, but like Marvel Snap players never focus on this card is too big for too cheap a cost. They always
Yeah,
focus on like energy cheat and I can't play the game, right? And like the best example of this is that we know based on internal data that has been disclosed to us, like Glenn has said this, that Silver Surfer was the best deck when Zabu was around. But everyone remembers Zabu because it was Spider-Man absorbing man. That's what
right.
they remember as the broken thing, but Silver Surfer was a better deck. And that's what I feel like is happening. The same, I think, what you would say would happen with Loki and Elsa. When Loki
Yep.
and Elsa were both around, Elsa was a stronger card, and Loki was secondary, but people remember Loki as the broken one and not Elsa. And I think that might be happening to Agent Venom right here, where it's like Agent Venom is the broken one, but people are going to remember Clog, and people are going to remember Hela, who I fully support those nerfs, and people are going to remember War Machine Legion.
Or Machine
Like,
Legion.
I'm not going to sit here and say that those nerfs are incorrect. I think they are correct. But, like, at what point does it matter that those decks that got nerfed are saying we don't want to play Marvel Snap, and Agent Venom is saying I would love to play Marvel Snap because I think I'm bigger than you when I do that. And I really wonder what people think about that. I really want to know. So if you're watching this, tell me what you think in the comments. I'm serious. I am reminded, and this is where I out myself as a weird American who watches sumo wrestling. I am reminded of a sumo wrestler named Teruno Fuji, who is the current Yokozuna grand champion of sumo. And his style, self stated, is to take whatever his opponent is doing to him, withstand it, and then win from there. Right? What he's saying is, come play with me. I will win. I am better. We will fight on your terms, and I will win. Right? And by comparison, there are other wrestlers who are much more, I would say, about imposing their will in the context of what people might call are like cheap plays, right? Like someone whose only move is to like throat thrust somebody until they go out. Like people who are much more about that than they are about accepting the the charge and then just saying I'm better and bigger than you, I'm going to win from there because that's what I do. And I'm struck by that in the context of Agent Venom. In this analogy, that's Agent Venom. Agent Venom is saying, we'll play the game on your terms. I am going to win it. You go do whatever it is you want to do. I'm bigger. It doesn't matter what you want to do. I'm going to beat you because I'm bigger and I'm smarter and I'm stronger. Whereas decks like Hell, decks like Clog, decks like Storm War Machine Legion are about not playing the game. They're not about saying, you go do what you're going to do, I'm going to win. They're about saying, we're not interacting today. my job is to make everything you're doing not relevant. And I guess I wonder where that line is, because you could very easily describe Hela in the terms I just described Agent Venom, right? It doesn't matter what you do, I'm going to be bigger. Where's the line? Like, how many game actions do you need to take before people start treating you like a Hela? And how many, like, where's the acceptable line of, like, how much you need to actually be doing for it to feel like a deserved payoff when you win by being bigger than your opponent? I really want to know. Finally, Lambie has come to a realization.
All right, so this topic is very interesting because I wanted to leave it for my episode a few days later, but I think it's very relevant to talk about it now because the Snap Creator Gauntlet just happened over the weekend, right? And we saw like a lot of content creators compete, and then for like a prize and for like glory and stuff like that. So what I wanted to talk about is that I finally understand, because what happened to me recently is that I've been playing the game a little bit less, which means I don't have every single card at every given point in time. Like I have to like save my tokens and save my caches and all that kind of stuff like that. So I realized that to be competitive in this game is kind of interesting because you kind of cannot slack off. You kind of cannot like disappear for a extended period of time, which is the scary thing, because I feel like to be competitive, for a game to be competitive, you need to be able to have access to like all the resources so that you can learn the game and so that you can like play the good stuff. But I feel like with Marvel Snap, I feel like there's this thing which I just want to like acknowledge, which is like acknowledge all of you guys who've been complaining in the past, because now I feel it as well. I feel that if you disappear for too long, it's a little bit difficult sometimes to always be up to date with like all the cards. Like, can you imagine like if like you missed out like one card last month, it was bad then, but then now it's super good. You need to like wait for the shop to rotate like until you get to the card again, and then I feel like you guys have had this concern for like a year
Yes,
or
like
2 years. But now I feel it. I actually no, it's not like I didn't know it exists, but now I actually feel I actually feel like I want a certain card, but like, oh wait, I didn't get it last week, so I guess I gotta wait for some rotation so I can get it to play my new tier 1 meta deck,
oh my
Like I
god.
feel it now. I feel it in my bones and soul right now. Like I just wanna say that I feel you guys, I can feel you guys, and I empathize fully right now. I'm
This is
on the
like
same
if
page.
your buddy, if your rich friend who is giving you advice, like just like just invest better. Like imagine if that guy went broke on like meme stocks. That's what he.
Yeah. I realize how it feels to be broke,
I
right? That's what he's
understand.
gonna say. Because I really do. I really do. I mean, but KM, do you understand though? Because you've never disappeared.
I know it exists academically, and I've
Yeah,
made
because I know it exists as
no,
well,
but
but
like
I'm now
I've done
feeling it.
videos to like when
Yeah, yeah.
TLSG came back, I did a whole video about the returning player problem where I called it like the biggest problem in the entire game. One of my big fears right now, I think I talked about this in the last episode, I'm not sure, was that people leave because of Pokemon Pocket, and then when they come back, they can't get back in because of how fucking terrible that is. I I may not have ever put myself in that situation, but don't let that fucking fool you. I am not a class traitor here. All right? I am a class traitor here, I guess. I don't really know the right way to use that. The point is, I'm an ally. All right? I advocate for this. Every time I get a chance to be like, "Hey, they should give out free stuff for this," I take it. Every time I get a chance to like influence second dinner in the right way, in as much as I get a chance, which is to say not really. But like I try, okay? I try to use my voice
Yes.
to help returning players. I do.
All right, guys. I just want to say I'm in full empathy mode right now. Every time you guys like come to my chat in the past on stream, and you guys are like, "Oh, I need to save my caches for this particular card. Is it gonna be good enough?" I feel you now, man. I feel you now, because the pain of buying the wrong
Oh
card
my
when you are
god.
sometimes not playing the game.
I
It's painful.
Here's the thing.
It's
I
painful.
feel you on that one, but also I hate getting that question because I don't want to be wrong. Where it's
I don't want to be wrong as well. Yeah.
because like I have to give the answer, right? But it's always in the context of the now. And it's like, well, what
Yes.
if that card gets nerfed? Then I'm an asshole. Like, what if another card gets buffed and the meta changes? Then I'm an asshole, right? And so I
I
hate
think when it
answering that
comes
question.
to yeah, when it comes to advice for such stuff, I think we've all established that like we give advice for the now, and then
Hmm.
if it doesn't become like if it changes in the future, that's just the way the game works, right? Because the game literally changes once a week, right? With the OT, almost every week.
It's
So
so
like
painful though.
yeah.
Like I hate having to react the way that I do to those questions. It's just like, should I buy misery? And it's like, God, you need to give me more time. I'm sorry, man. I don't
Maybe you
know.
should next week, that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
like the issue is, in order to give you the best answer, I need tens of hours of figuring stuff out, right? Like I can't just I
Yeah.
could flip a coin and lie to you, but I can't. Like I don't want to do that. And so it's like when people who are giving like fully formed verdicts, there's a reason I do like day one decks for most of my videos on new cards, is because I can be like, okay, that's what people are playing right now. Here are some ideas, go and run with them. And it's not like an endorsement of buying the card or not, because at every video I'm always like, hey, wait until you have more information, right? And I find it hard to believe that anyone seriously expects a verdict on a new card in a day,
True.
but they do, and it sucks, and it's hard to deal with.
It's funny, right? It's like they say that they don't expect it, but you kind of can tell that they really
They
want you to
do
know the
actually
answer.
expect, like it's not like they expect it, but they really wish you had it. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
they just really wish it was in stock. You know? All right, y'all. Thank you so much for making it through that video. I worry that I peaked the mic a couple times. If that happened, might be. Thank you so much. Shout out to Chillin' Dude. And of course, Lambie's going to take us out.
Thank you so much for being here, guys. Like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Bye bye.